Welcome in. Saturday night means it's time for DFS Chalk Talk, brought to you by Triple Play Fantasy. We get it rolling right after this. Oh, yes, indeed. It's time to get out of that kitchen and rattle those pots and pans. I'm your host, Jeff Mesha. As always, I'm here with my two fellas. I got Mikey over there in Nebraska. What's going on, Mike?
Not much. I've been to Wyoming to Colorado to Nebraska in the past 24 hours. Boy, I almost put like 950 miles on my car in the past 2 days. So good to be home. Good to be with you guys. I'm excited to talk some running back action.
There we go, man. That's a lot of windshield time. Speaking of that, I wasn't behind the windshield of a car, but I was behind a plane last week, seeing my friends up in the New England area, including Joseph in Connecticut. What's going on, my man?
I'm ready to go now, man. We are, we're talking running backs, wideouts. I got drafts being scheduled. This is it. We are here, and it is time.
Yeah.
I'm just going to mention really quick, if you missed us last week, when Jeff goes northeast, the whole entire power grid goes down, floods. I mean, luckily only like 35 people died this time, because last time Jeff went there, I think it was like 78. You just got to this guy brings so much energy with him that it completely knocks out the whole Northeast. And it knocked out power up there, if I remember correctly. Right, Joe?
Mesha, Jeffrey brought up a microburst with him. Now, historically, that is how women have described their sexual experiences with him. But in this case, he actually created a environmental microburst that delayed this episode a week.
Microburst. I knew right when you said microburst. I'm like, uh-oh, here we go.
He had to go there, man. That was my nickname in my early 20s, but we got over that, baby. I digress. If you haven't joined us before, hopefully this isn't your first time, because we discuss much more than microbursts and weather and this, that, and the other. But we get into everything DFS, and leading up to the season, we're talking about kind of draft strategy, really heading into preseason and the start of the NFL season. So we got into quarterbacks before. We're getting into running backs and kind of strategy about draft position, who you should draft, where and when kind of thing. So, and we've had a debate about this before the show and recently, and there's a lot of different takes as far as who you should target, if you should target a running back, and kind of when. So, Mike, I know we were talking about a few to start things off. I know there's some chalk running backs right off the bat, but a lot of us had a similar take. Maybe wide receiver is the way to go, perhaps in the first round, but you had a little bit of a different opinion on a few running backs.
So, yeah, I mean, for me, when you talk about volume play of a running back, and if you're looking at these guys that can get out there on the field at all times, now, is there always going to be 3 down backs? Probably not. You're probably going to see guys get spelled on series, things like that. But we are talking about guys who are going to be getting the majority of the work in most of these cases. And when they're going to be getting the majority of the work, when you start looking at the running back landscape and how thin and how bad that gets very quick, and really kind of you've got almost a decent list of elite wide receivers now. I mean, you can probably dip into the second round. If a running back doesn't go off the board, you could probably get at least 12 more receivers out there that are going to do you a pretty damn good job. Maybe not bring you the numbers like, say, Jamar Chase is going to, the CeeDee Lambs are going to bring you, but they're going to give you probably at least 85, 90% of that. I mean, don't forget, Cooper Kupp was better than all those guys 2 years ago. I mean, we're just 2 years removed, and now he's full strength. So when we got a full strength Cooper Kupp out there, that shakes everything up in the top 12 already. So, I mean, there's just such a vast array of wide receivers a guy can grab, but there really isn't a whole lot of these premier running backs that a guy can get. So for me, I don't mind actually spending a little bit of early draft capital in, like, say, Bijan Robinson, for instance. That's a guy who, or, obviously C-Mac. C-Mac's going to be the 101 of running backs in most cases. If that guy's putting on pads, we got to start C-Mac just because we've seen what that guy can do. And we're already starting off with the hamstring and things like that. And I know that those kind of injury issues with McCaffrey are very scary. But let's say in a vacuum, McCaffrey's one. But I feel like Bijan Robinson, I feel like there's a few other guys you can actually add into that list. Breece Hall's another one that I feel like I'm going to take him before I take maybe a premium wide receiver. And I'll take my chances on a receiver in the second round more so than, say, if I'm in an early position, like in the 105 or something like that. There's no way you're going to get one of those 3 premium running backs that I just talked about coming back to you in that round. So I feel like you're already at a disadvantage, kind of like a tight end disadvantage. There's not a whole lot of these guys to go around anymore that are giving you a whole lot of volume.
Right. And before I go to you, Joe, the thing with me is that with a lot of these teams these days, a lot of them are running back by committee, which including a play I will bring up. So you have very few chalk guys who are just the guy. That's it. You're the guy. That's that. So that's why it seems like kind of wide receiver has gotten a little bit more popular. Not to mention it's a throwing league these days, but that's kind of my hesitation a little bit at the running back position. I don't know what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I mean, it's evolved. Mike said the draft fantasy wise has evolved. I mean, 5-10 years ago for sure, your first three picks, you were pretty much striving for 2 running backs, maybe a wide out, people sitting on quarterback. But you've got these dogs now at wideout who are getting these $50 million a year contracts and are becoming the best and most important, most prolific players on all of these offenses. Christian McCaffrey specifically, never easy for me to watch him go by on a draft board when given the opportunity. However, I will say after that, and I love running backs, but even like a Saquon or a Bijan, it's hard, in my opinion, to say, I'm going to take Saquon or Bijan over CeeDee Lamb or Tyreek Hill. However, that being said, you look at a Barkley and a Bijan, and maybe this is the tiebreaker. They're going to hit it from both sides. They're going to get you points on the ground, but they're also going to catch the ball. They're going to get PPR, whereas obviously wide receivers, you don't necessarily get that, in thinking about any little thing to get the advantage, or at least, you get those 90 seconds when you're drafting that, making that choice live. It is tough, but you look at the top 5 to 10 wide receivers, and it's hard to argue with all the injuries and other question marks going around and running back. And last thing too, like if you have Barkley and Bijan at the top of your running back list or closer there, I watched 5 minutes of that Eagle game last night. No more Kelsey, but they still did the tush push. So you got to look at it from a touchdown perspective too. Are these guys going to get in the end zone, or are they going to be 20-yard line to 20-yard line, and all these teams are breaking out all these new stops at the goal line? It's a tricky time for running backs. They get the most touches still, but it's a fluid.
Right, which I mean, last year was a detriment to DeAndre Swift, which a lot of people had him on higher on their boards. Now he's in Chicago. That's the funny thing. I just brought up running back by committee because you have DeAndre Swift, but you also have Roshan Johnson, and I'm forgetting another player over there. It's 3 guys in Chicago, along with a host of other. Pardon me, Mike.
It's Khalil Herbert.
Oh, there you go. So along with everybody else at wide receivers. So Mike brought up Bijan. We brought up Breece Hall. I'm bringing up Jahmyr Gibbs as like one of the guys that I would bring up ahead of a wide receiver. I get it. Montgomery is there, but I'll tell you, the Lions have probably the best offensive line in the league. I mean, last year you had Jahmyr Gibbs. He played 15 games. Montgomery played 14. He had 945 yards rushing, 10 rushing touchdowns. He had 316 yards receiving, 1 receiving touchdown. They look to put him in a bigger role offensively. He looks to be a 3-down back this year. So I don't know if you agree with me or not, but Jahmyr Gibbs is even with Montgomery there, one of my guys I'm putting ahead of a guy like Jamar Chase or somebody like that. Not necessarily CeeDee Lamb, but you get the idea.
See, now if you give me like, say, the 109, 110, 111, somewhere in there, I think I'd even rather go double up, like, say, a Breece Hall, a Jahmyr Gibbs, something like that. If I can, Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs, that would probably be like the ideal spot. But I'd rather take my chances with a team like that than to stack up 2 solid receivers and, like, say, a DeAndre Swift, for instance. Because that guy's going to be a guy that falls later, and you can still get DJ Moore later. You can get Malik Neighbors later. Now, we don't know what Malik Neighbors can do, but if that guy can turn out even 75% of the volume of a CeeDee Lamb, you're going to be way money ahead because of the other spot on the DeAndre Swift part of the thing. Because you just have such a downgrade at running back, and you've got all these running backs that completely share backfields, where you got these other ones where, yes, they are sharing the backfield, but it's more like they're getting spelled out of these backfields. They're still getting the bulk of the volume, and then every about 3 drives or things like that, then you see your other guy come in, you cuss at your TV because you got somebody besides them. But look at how often they just run the ball. That should offend you just as much as far as how your wide receiver usage is, if that's how you're looking at things, right? Like, it should be like, oh man, they ran the ball again. Now my wide receiver is just pointless. It's not really it's pointless. It's just, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I got to bring up one other guy that I was thinking of, along with Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, McCaffrey. I'm curious about your thoughts on Jonathan Taylor, because this guy has been a stud in the past. He had a beyond a dud of a year last year. With Richardson back healthy, he seems to be the chalk guy in Indianapolis. I think he's poised for a big statistical year, and I might add him in with those guys like Bijan. Your thoughts on that? What do you think, Joe?
It's tough. It's tough on Jonathan Taylor. I'm looking at him now, and he's touchdown heavy. The weeks he got touchdowns, you were looking at high teens or in the 20s. The weeks he didn't get touchdowns, he still had the yards last year, but you were looking into the single digits. So it's just, Jonathan Taylor has been a head scratcher for a lot of years now, because we know what he can do, and based on how that team is, he's a tough one for me. I don't know what to do with him, and he's ended up on my roster the last couple of years, and you've loved it a few times and you've hated it a couple times. Real quick question when we're talking with these wideouts though and everything, like, it's hard, right before we got on the air, I'm looking at new reports about Brandon Ayuk, and now it looks like he's going to go to he's going to either stay in San Francisco or go to the Steelers. So quick question in general. If Ayuk moves, A, how does that make you guys feel about Debo? The same, different, one way or the other? And B, if Ayuk goes to the Steelers, what would that make you feel for him from a fantasy perspective?
So I'm really
Mike, your thoughts.
I'm really not a big thing on that Steelers offense. You got Russell Wilson coming in off of 2 abysmal years in Denver. As far as I'm concerned, I don't think that he really had a lot to bring to the table. If you get Justin Fields rocking in there soon, I think you could see some spark on that offense. But at the moment, they're planning on starting Russell Wilson. I just don't think that's the right move. I would be a lot more excited about Ayuk going there if he was hucking the rock, because I think he could easily take over that offense as the number 1 since they got rid of Deontay Johnson. I like it, but I would rather have Justin Fields as my quarterback there.
What do you do with Debo? Does Debo move up for you guys without Ayuk and San Fran?
Dude, Debo is such a head scratcher because he's such a great player, and yet you just know that somehow McCaffrey is going to end up bending him over in the end, and he's not going to get the touches, and he's not going to get the looks. It does make it seem a little bit better without Ayuk there to get Debo some looks down the field. But, man, McCaffrey is such an X factor, and he's such a big percentage of that offense that I still don't think he's all that viable, for lack of a better term.
You got to check out these Debo Samuel points from last year. Just to your point, Mace, he fluctuates. 8, 19, 24, 0.06, 10, 1.1, 14, 7, 18, 38, 36, then back down to 19, 7, 15, and 4. So that son of a bitch is like the Joe Biden stock market.
So he's Deshaun Jackson. He's Deshaun Jackson. That's who he is, really. Let's just put it that way.
He is. That's true.
I don't think he moves anywhere for me. I think he stays right the same. I think Juwan Jennings moves up into that position pretty well, and I think I think you still see the kind of the same spread of volume. Like, you still got Kittle out there as well. So I think it just kind of stays even for me. I mean, he might get a couple extra targets out of the deal, but I don't think it's going to be anything noteworthy or anything that's going to move him up on my rankings at all.
I got you.
IU going over there definitely moves him down unless they all of a sudden say, hey, Justin Fields is the quarterback now. Russell Wilson, I feel like, is washed up. And hopefully he comes out there and shows me good old Russell Wilson again. And he was just kind of a F you Denver kind of mode, because Denver does really kind of screw up a lot of athletes. It's a harder place to play in some cases. So who knows?
Touche, which good luck to you, Cortland Sutton. I guess we'll see what happens as the number one over there. And I know that's your favorite team, Mikey. So anyway, and we'll get into a little bit more depth with wide receivers next week. But I mean, as far as running backs is concerned, chalk-wise, up front, guys who I would take ahead of wide receiver, there's only a handful of them. I'm talking McCaffrey, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jonathan Taylor, and that's my list. I don't know what you guys think, agree, disagree. I know Mikey agrees with the Breece Hall and Bijan, at least for two of those.
Yeah, and I mean, Bijan, for me, he's like, if you look at, like, say, Dalvin Cook numbers, like, say, 2020 to, like, 2023 or something, I believe the 3 years, there's 3 or 4 years in there anyways, where the guy had, like, 1,500-yard seasons every single year up there with Kirk Cousins, feeding him the rock constantly, either by pass or by ground. The guy scored like 40, 50 touchdowns. I mean, he did amazing over those few years. So to have Kirk Cousins going down to Atlanta really gives Bijan Robinson that big uptick for me, because I think that you can probably see a lot of replication of that offense there. Same reason Kyle Pitts moved way up. Same reason Drake London moved up. That team is ready. They just need a few defensive pieces, but they really needed a quarterback. So I think I agree with that exact list. I think Jonathan Taylor doesn't make it. I think I'm going to start grabbing wide receivers before I grab Jonathan Taylor. But I see your point. That guy is one of those guys that I feel like can get you that thing. But that's where, so now you're seeing him be a lot of people's running back one, right? Because they go wide receiver. Now, how confident are you going into day one with Jonathan Taylor as your running back one? I mean, you got to have, it'll feel okay, but it's not going to feel great, and I feel like all these other guys are going to feel great. That's my only argument on Jonathan Taylor. But again, you could be very right, because the guy's a stud, and given the situation and if you get that offense rocking, especially with how Anthony Richardson got hurt real quick twice. I mean, he got hurt, then he came back, and then he got hurt and was out for the rest of the season, if you guys remember right. Yeah. So that's got to lean towards, you got to stop running the ball so much, kid. And they're going to have to start leaning back on that running game. It could be a great call. But again, like, that's one guy that if he's my running back one, I'm not feeling great about it. I'm not feeling shitty about it, but I'm not feeling great about it.
Yeah, that's a great
Joe, your thoughts?
I'm looking at these, and you guys listed like the top fives with McCaffrey and Bijan and Barkley. We haven't talked about one interesting thing real quick is we haven't talked about James Cook at all, who is way up high on the draft boards this year. But to Mikey's point, like, if you just throw the 5 running backs we talked about into your top 5, that means 6 to 10 is basically Jonathan Taylor, Rashad White. You got Kenny Walker. You got what's his name? Kyron Williams, Kamara, Mixon, Jacobs, Henry Pacheco, Etienne, A-Chain. What all sound like good players, but here's the bottom line. You're talking about 5 to 10 for wideout, and you're talking about freaking A.J. Brown still, Nakua, Devonta Adams, Garrett Wilson, Deebo Samuel. It feels like there's just some heavy hitters on the wideout side that just have less question marks than some of these other running backs. There's just so many question marks at the running back position, injury, your team dynamic, how many running. It feels like these wideouts give you a little more of a warm, cuddly. To Mike's last point, do you want Jonathan Taylor as your number one, or do you feel better of getting like a Deebo as your number 2 wideout? There's just more guys at wideout that I think are going to make you feel a little warmer and fuzzier coming out of your draft than at running back. We all got to pick them.
Yep.
We all got to pick them. But I'm not sure. I think the consistency of wideout is going to be this theme to this fantasy season as it pertains to wideout versus running back.
And I'll tell you, and like I said, we'll get into wide receiver next week a little bit more in depth. Hopefully that kind of answers some questions about running back, where we stand, what your thoughts are. If you have disagreements, agreements, hit us up on Twitter. We got our handles down below. And any parting words here, gentlemen, until next week?
No, getting closer, man. Preseason football starting out there. There's been football on the old TV. It's great. Love it.
Penix looked good. That was probably the first thing to learn.
Yep.
Oh,
it looks ready.
Little debate in the ATL to start. So, like I said, next week we'll be on. Keep up with us on Twitter. Keep up with us on Facebook, Instagram. You know where to find us. In any case, until next week,